I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. Midterm elections fast upon us, the volatility across the country. Times big city columnist Ginia Bellafante found it closer to home on the Upper East Side. She joins us in a moment. It's no secret that the city is facing a housing crisis of epic proportions. 1 out of every 10 children in our public schools has been homeless at one time or another. New York Times Metro Education reporter Eliza Shapiro and Metro reporter Nikita Stewart, who focuses on the housing crisis, explain the obstacles the children and their families face. My Times colleagues discuss the issues of the week on The Backstory, and I'll offer some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, big city columnist Ginia Bellafante. She covered the Proud Boys, as they're called. They were at the East Side Republican Club. They didn't make the Republican Club themselves, dissidents, or the police very proud. What went wrong, Ginia?
Gavin McInnes, the founder, was scheduled to do a lecture, a talk. He's a hugely controversial far-right extremist figure. And what happened was that some protesters showed up, some anti-fascist protesters showed up, and some of his followers showed up. And the big fight broke out. This is the kind of thing that's been happening in Portland, Oregon, for example, all the time. These right-wing and far-left groups really going at each other. And the real controversy was in the way the police department handled it, because they immediately arrested 3 members of the far left group and none of the Proud Boys. And all kinds of people, weighed in to complain. Former city officials, Andrew Cuomo, civilians, saying, how is this possible? It's so skewed. And then approximately 48 hours after the controversy really blew up, they said they were going to look for nine members of the Proud Boys.
So what do you attribute that to? And you covered demonstrations before,
yes,
whether the Republican National Convention, whether Occupy Wall Street. I mean, is this a typical trend?
I saw this.
And people, as you wrote, complained about it in Portland as well.
Yes, and I really put this in the context of the NYPD's history of really going after protesters on the left in a pretty aggressive way. First, even before the RNC convention in 2004, there were giant, Iraq War protests all over the country. The NYPD charged with mounted horses into some of the crowds. At the Republican National Convention, hundreds and hundreds of people were detained illegally, a federal judge later ruled. And that has not really engendered good spirit. Protesters are really afraid of the cops here because of this history. And then, of course, there's everything that happened in Occupy. The pepper spraying, the caging people, really a lot of ill will. And this seems to almost have been a reflex, I don't know why. I know that they have an investigative unit that is supposed to be monitoring alt-right groups, some of which are classified as hate groups. The Proud Boys seem to be pretty new on the NYPD's radar. When I asked a spokesman how they came onto the radar initially, he said, well, McInnes had spoken at NYU Republican Club and he was maced. So it was almost the response was, well, he was a victim. What
about the notion of whether someone like that should be invited in the first place?
Well,
I believe in free speech. People have the right to speak. People have the right to listen. But what about that?
I had heard that
and people have the right not to listen.
Yes, that he sort of presented himself to the club. It wasn't necessarily that they sought him out, but they hosted him. And I found it a very odd thing in the very centrist Upper East Side for him to have been invited. I mean, the Metropolitan Republican Club has people like Jeb Bush, Steve Forbes, pretty predictable figures. Pretty tame, and it was very odd that they had him speak to begin with, I thought.
And how do you reconcile the police who, by nature, by mission, are supposed to enforce law and order, and demonstrators, left or right, are there to, in effect, disrupt?
Right, and I don't think, I think New York, there are special, space constraints about New York that make it a really big challenge, both to demonstrate and to police demonstrations.
Right.
We don't really, this came to light again during the Women's March last year. There just is not the space. There are more people
Right.
riled
a lot
up
of density.
than we have room to really accommodate. So,
Let me ask you about another question. The Brooklyn-Queens Expressway,
Yeah,
which
that's a
you've
big
written about with
controversy.
great passion. Is this Robert Moses all over again?
Yes. However many years later, 50 some odd years later, the neighborhood of Brooklyn Heights, historic, first landmarked district in New York City, is going to battle again with his legacy, because he, of course, ran the BQE through the Heights. He won. His original ambition was to demolish a lot of the neighborhood and run it right through the surface streets, as you know. But here, it's in great disrepair. It was never built to sustain the 150,000 some odd cars that traverse it every day. It's not a question of leaving it alone. It must be repaired. And what has happened now is that the City Department of Transportation is recommending as their favored proposal extending the promenade, one of the most famous tourist sites in the city, and turning it into a 6-lane highway.
So very quickly, what should they do?
Well, there are, the community feels that there are not a great number of options that have been explored. Another option, which they do not seem to favor as much, the community certainly sees it as the best of two terrible situations, would be to repair the bridge at night, lane by lane, section by section, divert that traffic onto the surface streets. That would, of course, crowd a very sort of tight-knit, intimate, low-density neighborhood.
And as you suggested, they probably should have done all this before they built the park.
The really confusing dimension to all this is that there is a giant and very beautiful park that was industrial dockland, could have easily accommodated a bypass.
Except then they wouldn't have gotten the revenue from development.
Right.
Big city columnist Ginia Bellafante, thank you for joining us. And you'll find her column, of course, online at nytimes.com, in print Sundays in the Metropolitan section. My Times colleagues Nikita Stewart and Eliza Shapiro join me next. Welcome back. The city is thriving, the city is growing, the city is in crisis. It depends on where you look and whom you ask. 1 out of every 10 children in the public schools has been homeless in the past year. Record numbers, those living in public housing, of course, facing deprivation. Joining us to discuss these paradoxes, my Times colleagues, Metro reporter Nikita Stewart, who's focused her attention on housing issues, and Metro education reporter Eliza Shapiro, who recently wrote about the children who've experienced homelessness. Eliza, that sounds like a really big number, 1 out of 10. Is it compared to other places, and is that number growing? And how are these kids affected compared to other kids in the school system?
It's a really, really big number. I think New York probably has the highest percentage of homeless students than any big city in America. LA's homeless student population is about 3% of the overall student body. Chicago's is about 5%. Obviously, New York trumps that. And how are these kids impacted? I mean, in every single way, because their basic needs are very often not met before they get to school. It's hard for them to actually reach the school door in the first place because they're traveling potentially through multiple boroughs to get there. They need 3 meals a day. They need winter coats. They need every resource possible before we even get to worrying about the fact that they deserve to learn how to read and write and do math and pass state tests just as much as their peers do.
Nikita, you've written about homelessness for quite a while. Mayor Bloomberg couldn't solve it. Mayor de Blasio hasn't solved it. The numbers keep going up. We're not even at winter yet. Is this a problem we just have to say is intractable?
It's intractable right now because of the lack of housing. This all comes down to affordable housing. And when you look at the number of children who are homeless or have experienced homelessness in a year, you're looking at a lot of children who are doubled up with their families, tripled up. And, I remember being struck when I was reporting about cold weather and the lack of heat. And nearly every apartment that people allowed me to enter, it was overcrowded. Just folks living on top of each other. And there was one house I went to where, an apartment, and it was 1.5 bedrooms because they had turned part of the living room to a bedroom. And there were probably 4 teenagers there. And I thought to myself, what happens when they turn 18? Mm-hmm. There's nowhere for them to afford. So,
Eliza, is anything being done specially for these kids in the school system? Are they being identified and getting any kind of special education? Or social services?
There are more social services and more social workers specifically now for these students than there were a few years ago. The city spends about $14 million for after school reading programs and social workers for these kids. But
$14 million for how many kids?
For 114,000 kids, right? And the DO.
If I knew my math better, I would figure out how little that was per student.
It's about 1 social worker for every 1,600 kids or so. So it's really a drop in the bucket. And of course, the Department of Education's overall budget is $32 billion. There's a lot of money, not a lot of resources yet.
Really? That's absolutely amazing. Let me ask you, Nikita, about a story you're having in the paper this weekend and online in a very interesting way, a new way of storytelling by the New York Times. Tell us about it.
Yes, we know that more people read the news on their phones, and this is kind of a documentary style with still photos, and you'll read the words along with the photos. There won't be photos and then words, photos and then words. And so we're hoping that this will be an integrated form of storytelling and that it will be digestible to folks as they're on the train, or they can still read it in print over the weekend.
How has this been to produce a story like this? What is the difference between this and sitting down at a keyboard and just writing a story?
Well, you have to think visually, and that was a big part of it. And, I actually enjoyed it because you have to convince people to not only share their words, but can we come into your home and can we come to your job and take lots of photos of you?
And in the old days, people used to be very reticent about that. Even, if you stuck a tape recorder in front of them, they suddenly balked.
Yes, and I still ran into that, but it's a beautiful story about income inequality, and I'm hoping readers enjoy it.
Eliza, let me ask you about some of the stories you've written lately about kids who are struggling in school, both in terms of integration, something that the mayor, I guess, could have done a long time ago in the secondary schools, and also the new teachers contract, which gives bonuses to teach in struggling schools, and also the test scores, which you wrote about. I mean, are the kids improving? The mayor has taken over the school system, starting with Mike Bloomberg. Are the schools getting better?
I think there's probably an argument to be made that many of the schools are steadily improving, marginally at least on test scores. But I think a bigger question is, how do you turn around schools that have completely concentrated poverty, high percentages of homeless kids, kids with so many needs without considering integration as a factor? I think that's the biggest challenge for the mayor and the chancellor now.
So does integration improve things, or is that a totally separate issue?
There's a lot of research that's indicated that integrating schools can help improve them academically. Just think about being a teacher or a principal in a school where 40% of the kids are homeless. It's really hard to get to the academics when you have clusters of vulnerability and poverty like that in schools. And I think it's an open question about whether just simply adding more money to those schools is actually going to turn around the academics.
Now, are we talking about integration by economic class, by race, by both? And if so, are there enough people to integrate? Are there enough to go around?
No, there aren't. And it would be racial and socioeconomic integration. But I think the point is not to do some kind of quota and pick up kids and move them around, but rather to focus on schools where kids are most struggling because the needs are greatest, and thinking about how integration can work in those neighborhoods. For example, on the Lower East Side, which is a very diverse neighborhood with a lot of really struggling schools.
Thanks to both of you. We look forward to your storytelling on our phones
It's set in the Lower East Side.
and the paper. Thanks to Nikita Stewart, Eliza Shapiro for joining us, and the backstory is next. Violence in the streets, name-calling at the highest level or by the lowest. My Times colleagues, contributing writer Clyde Haberman and Eleanor Randolph, have witnessed it all this week. If we're talking about journalists in trouble, no more was that apparent than in Saudi Arabia. How do we explain what happened there? How do we explain the reaction in Saudi Arabia and at the White House?
Well, let's go to the White House. I mean, Saudi Arabia is what it is. As far as I'm concerned, it's a barbaric country in most regards. I don't care how much money they have. The White House reaction is inexcusable. This man has clearly been brutally and grotesquely murdered. And he's worried about the $110 billion in arms sales. And he has support from people like Pat Robertson said, yes, we have to remember the these arms sales. They're very, very important. So much for Christian leadership on this. It is a disgraceful performance, and at some point, you know, it's almost 2 years now that this administration has been in place. There are many roles that they have not filled. But one of them is a human rights person in the State Department, an important role for at least the last 40 years, began really under Jimmy Carter. And they don't care about human rights. As far as they're concerned, it's some airy-fairy kind of concept that they're not going to worry about. The important thing is selling those guns to those people.
Oh, and you know, what was really, one thing I thought that this managed to focus on the brutality of the Saudi Arabian regime. It's not new. People who do any research will tell you about how they cut off hands and heads, and there are lots of things that go on like that. But you know, when Trump's first reaction to it was really disturbing, to say the least. I mean, he said that he wasn't a citizen. He wasn't an American. So why should we care? You know, why should we worry about this guy being chopped up in Turkey? And so you realize this man there seems to be no moral core there.
This also comes the same week that the president was degrading women as well.
Again. But
just a string of, if not obscenities, then at least degrading remarks.
He is who he is. You know, I was one of those suckers who at least thought that being president counted for something, and that he would rise to the office, as many, you know, lesser folks who become president one way or another did. You know, nobody thought much of Harry Truman, and he was a mensch. But this guy isn't. He's, I'm sorry, I can't even control my language on it. He's a bum.
Most women who hear that kind of talk see a very small, nervous man. You know, if somebody calls you a dog or, you know, a horse face, yeah, there's something wrong with him. You immediately, if, you know, most women see, you know, there's something wrong with this guy, and he's very insecure about something. So, you know, I think that what he doesn't realize is how much that diminishes him while he's trying to destroy other people.
How is that going to affect the elections coming up in just 2 weeks?
You know, some of the internal polling shows the difference between male and female voting is just going to be huge. In some races, there's a 20% difference between the way women are going to vote and men. And so, I mean, I think what you're going to see I mean, who knows, you know, but I think what you're going to see in the suburbs, and especially around New York City, is that the sort of suburban women, you know, the soccer moms, the sort of intelligent women that care about sort of what's going on, if they come out and vote in great numbers, then the Republicans are in real trouble.
What about the women who voted for Trump in 2016?
I think they'll
got a lot
still
of them.
vote.
Yeah,
They'll still vote for him. I don't think he
he's got
loses.
them.
People, once they've declared themselves a Trumpite, I don't think they
Yeah.
want to back away from that.
And which way do the Democrats go? Do they stick with Michelle Obama and say we're taking the high road, or do they listen to Hillary Clinton and say maybe it's time for us to take the low road as well?
Eric Holder. Again, we'll have to see. The anger is understandable, though, and being nice hasn't worked very well for them in many respects, because the Republicans just run roughshod over them. Just for example, there was an agreement that, okay, after the Kavanaugh hearings, we'll break. No more judicial appointments now. Everybody wants to go campaign. And then it turns out that Mitch McConnell and Grassley have broken that agreement, and they're trying to shove a few more super conservative judges down everybody's throat. Democrats, there's no point playing nice. I understand that point of view.
Well, they've got, Mitch McConnell was saying the other day that, this tax plan has caused a huge deficit. And as a result, he said, I can't believe he said this right before the election, but he said that because there's this huge deficit, we're going to have to cut back on, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, anything that helps people who aren't rich and aren't part of the 1%.
And people who vote.
If the Democrats cannot use that to get people out to vote, they're just useless.
Yeah. Why would McConnell say something like that?
I don't know.
Well, the timing is odd, but the belief has always been there. It's basically, look, this tax cut basically helped the super rich. There was a few dollars for some other folks. Basically helped the super rich, and as we knew they would do, they said, oh yeah, our budget deficit is ballooning again. Well, you the poor and you the not rich at all are going to have to shoulder the burden. This is standard Republican behavior.
Well, we'll see soon enough how the Democrats react to it and what the consequences of that are. Thanks to Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph for joining me, and I'll offer some additional thoughts next on Coda. In 2 weeks, Andrew Cuomo will ask for your vote again. He wants a third term as governor, but for all he's accomplished, he has failed so far to provide 2 other reasons to re-elect him: a third-term agenda, what he hopes to achieve in the next 4 years that he hasn't done during the last 8, and a willingness to engage in his Republican rival in even a single debate. His father faced the same dilemma when he sought re-election in 1994. Mario Cuomo offered no coherent rationale for his next 4 years, nor did he agree to a debate with George Pataki face to face. Mario Cuomo was defeated in 1994. This time, Andrew Cuomo seems destined to win, but with no debate, you'll be the losers. Debates go to the heart of our democracy, but nowadays we shy away from relevant conversations about governing. After all, one debater's views might offend someone's sensitive ears. Why listen when body language reveals more than canned responses? Do the candidates ever state anything new that they haven't already said? And don't we already know what we think anyway? But as Jefferson said, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. And as humans capable of changing our minds, how do we really know for sure when we're right? I recently watched a TV series called The Staircase. A man was accused of murdering his wife. The wife's sisters were convinced that he killed her. His children, though, were completely persuaded that she fell accidentally. Like Dr. Ford and Justice Kavanaugh, each was 100% certain. Yet of all the protagonists on the show, Only one person, the accused husband, who had been at the scene that night, knew for certain what had happened. The older I get, the more literally and figuratively I see shades of gray. We sometimes forget that freedom of speech also means the freedom to listen. People generally quarrel, G.K. Chesterton said, because they cannot argue. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.